is a legendary Jewish village in East Europe somewhere where everybody is a little bit simple. They're not quite sharp minds. And so the people of Chelm are famous for doing some weird things. So this story is about the Master Physician of Chelm. So once upon a time, there were no doctors in Chelm. And one day, something bad happened, and someone got sick. They had to send him away to the big city, Lubeck, which was quite a few miles away. And afterwards, the chief rabbi, who was the only rabbi in Chelm, decided that they needed to get a doctor. So they thought, the town council thought, how are they going to get a doctor in Chelm? So finally, since they are all in this together, we are all in this together, they decided they would promote one of their students from the school, Header, to be a medical student, raise money, and send him off to Lubeck. So the rabbi suggested they pick the best and the brightest student in the Cheder, almost in the yeshiva, and send him off. And no, the town fool said, no, we should find the worst student, the one who is never going to make it through the school and become a rabbi, because we don't want to waste anyone who would really be a good contributor to the religious school. So they picked the worst student, Michael Sanya, and they raised money because we're all in this together, and they sent him off to the big city Lubeck to study medicine. So Michael went off to the big city, and somehow or other, with help from all the other students, he actually managed to finish medical school. And so he took his diploma on his goat skin, because sheepskins were a little bit too expensive there. So he took his goat skin and went back to Chelm to start his private practice, to hang up his shingle. So he found a nice little building, a little shed that he could work there, took one of the roof boards off and painted the sign, Master Physician, and painted it and put the roof board back up on the roof, because that's where you put shingles, and set up his office, and nobody came to visit. No one seemed to be sick. There was nobody who wanted the town doctor. And he couldn't figure out why this was until one day the town fool came by and said, you know, you've got your shingle up on the roof. And the master physician said, well, of course, that's where shingles go. And the fool said, no, you have to hang it out so people can see it. Oh, said Michael, the master physician. And he immediately took the board down, hung it outside his door, master physician, and soon had lots of business. So now, some of the times he did incredibly good things, and other times he was a little bit off. One day, the town butcher came in with a big gash on his right arm. He had cut himself with the knife, and he needed it sewed up. So Michael said, okay, it's your right hand. And he took out some thread that he had kept from the right-hand side of a goat, because Michael knew you had to have special, different suture material for different conditions. So he took out right-sided suture, and the butcher said, wait a minute, I don't want a really horrible crosshatch scar with all those crosshatchings and railroad tracks. Do something different. I really can't stand the crosshatching. So Michael thought. He put a poultice on the good arm and said, I know, I'll sew up the left arm, and then he won't have any bad hatch marks on the right arm. And then he realized, well, there wasn't a cut there. He said, well, I'm a surgeon. So he took his knife and made a cut on the butcher's left hand, and it bled a little bit. He put a poultice on it, and he went back to his suture cabinet and got the thread off a left side of the goat and put it on the needle and proceeded to sew up the left side wound, put a poultice on that, and told the butcher how to take care of the wounds and sent him off. And about a week or two later, the butcher came back to show off his handiwork, and the left side scar was thin, beautiful, but it was covered with crosshatchings. The right side wound, however, was a little yucky and gaping and raised and irregular, but there were no crosshatches. And all the people said, wow, what a genius physician Michael is. He managed to sew up a wound and not leave any crosshatches from the stitch marks. And everyone applauded. Then there was the other time when an army man came into town with a broken leg. And he limped in and he went, saw the shingle, and went and said to Michael, I have a broken leg. Can you do something for me? And Michael said, yeah, I'm a physician. Okay. So he had the soldier sit down, and he looked, and the soldier had scars all over him. He had wounds that were healed in various degrees. And he said to the soldier, wow, you must have been in a lot of battles. And the soldier said, yes, indeed, I am a veteran of the wars. And Michael said, oh, I can't treat you. Go to the next town. They have a veterinarian. So the soldier got up and left. And finally, there was another time they still talk about when one of the boys in town, let's say Joel, got into the beer vat where they were brewing beer. He fell into it and was choking and gasping and eventually got pulled out, but he drank a little bit too much of the beer. So Joel was drunk as a skunk. And this was not good for a 7-year-old boy. So, of course, they brought him to the town physician and said, oh, great, Master Physician, what can you do for this child? He's drunk too much beer and he's sick. So Michael scratched his head, thought back. In medical school, they had mentioned there was a cure from this land far away called America. And when people had this alcohol sickness, they made this special potion and gave it to them, and it took away the sickness. The potion was called a prairie oyster. So Michael said, well, I'll make a prairie oyster and we'll give it to him. So he gathered the townspeople and said, okay, we need these ingredients. I need 2 fresh eggs from a prairie hen. I need some Worcestershire sauce, and I need an oyster. So he sent the people out in town to get these supplies because they're all in this together. First, he got the poultry man and said, I need 2 eggs from a prairie hen. And the poultry man misunderstood him, so he said, prairie hens, how do I get a chicken to pray? So he went home, put on his tallis and his tefillin, and went to the chicken coop, grabbed 2 of the chickens, aimed them toward Jerusalem, and started davening and praying. And when he was done with the morning prayers, he looked, and each of those chickens had laid an egg. So he took the eggs back and said, here are 2 eggs fresh from praying hens. And Michael added them to the potion. Then he needed some Worcestershire sauce. So he went to the pickle man and said, I need your worst sour pickle sauce you possibly have. And the pickle man said, well, there's this barrel of pickles that have been around for a long time. It's really bad. It must be the worst sour sauce I have. So he took some of the worst sour sauce back to the Master Physician Michael. And finally, he had only one ingredient. How would he get an oyster? Oysters weren't really found in Chelm, and besides, they weren't kosher. So he had to come up with a substitute. Oyster. He said, it must be an oxtail. So he got the butcher and said, do you have a freshly butchered ox that we can make oxtail stew into? And the butcher said, yes, here's a kosher slaughtered ox. Here's the tail. You cook it. So Michael took the 3 ingredients and prepared a potion. Oxtail soup, worst sour pickle sauce, and 2 fresh eggs from praying hens. Mixed them together and made the boy, forced him to drink the potion, but the boy did, and he immediately went to sleep. The next day, people went to see what happened, and the boy was miraculously cured. There was nothing wrong with him. He wasn't drunk, he wasn't sick. He had miraculously been cured overnight by Mikhail Sanya's prairie oyster potion that he had learned from the doctors in the far land of America while he was a medical student at Lubeck. And so altogether, the town cheered their master physician, who continued to work in Chelm for a long time. And that is the story, 3 of the stories of the Master Physician of Chelm, and perhaps there will be more stories of his adventures in the future. Thank you.
Oh, very good. Very good. Coming from a doctor, that's always an appreciated story. I love it. I always love those old Chelm stories. They're fun. Make it. They're always interesting, and they carry that flavor of the old Eastern European tales. Okay, we've got time for another story here. Is there somebody